On the 7th of October in 2023, the Hamas movement controlling the Gaza Strip announced the start of Al-Aqsa flooding and invaded territories of Israel, marking the beginning of another phase in the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it.
Despite the fact that the State of Israel was established only 75 years ago, the conflict between Arabs and Jews has deep historical roots. So how did it come to be that two kindred peoples couldn't coexist for thousands of years? And what does Third Reich and Stalin have to do with it?
He's going to destroy the world.
Now you probably all know, or at least heard about the biblical character Noah, who built an ark and survived the global flood along with his family and pairs of animals. Legend has it that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It is believed that Japheth gave rise to the Indo-Europeans, the descendants of Ham settled in North Africa, and Shem became the 4th father of the Semitic people, including Jews and Arabs. So what does it mean? Are Arabs and Jews brotherly people? In essence, yes. Arabic and Hebrew belong to the same language group, share many common words, and read right to left. Both kosher and halal imply humane slaughter of animals and prohibit consumption of pork. Ultimately, both Jews and Arabs traditionally believe in the same one God. In the Quran, the key figure of Judaism, Prophet Moses, Musa, is mentioned more frequently than any other prophet, including the founder of Islam, Prophet Muhammad. At the core, Judaism and Islam have much more in common than with the third Abrahamic religion, Christianity. It's hard to believe now, but there was time when Jews felt quite comfortable under the Arab rule. For instance, in Al-Andalus, Spain, which was conquered by the Umayyad Caliphate by the 8th century, Jewish culture experienced a golden age. Although Jews didn't have the same rights as Muslims, they still had the status of dhimmi, or people of the covenant. During this period, many Jewish theologians, philosophers, astronomers, poets, and even military leaders emerged, leaving their mark on world history. In 1492, the Spanish completed their Reconquista, bringing an end to the Muslim rule in the region. Like many other Europeans, they expelled Jews from their land, and some Spanish Jews, known as Sephardim, returned to Palestine. A significant Jewish community re-emerged in the city of Safed in northern modern-day Israel. By the end of the 19th century, Jews made about 5% of the population in Ottoman Palestine, with the majority of Arabs. Moving to this relatively impoverished region was costly at the time, but Jewish settlers received financial assistance, notably from the Rothschild family. In the meanwhile, Theodor Herzl, founder of Zionism, while in Paris, constantly heard calls for violence against Jews from the streets and got convinced that the Jews had to create their own independent state. In 1896, Herzl published The Jewish State. Interestingly, Herzl did not consider the territory of modern-day Israel as the sole possible location for such a project. Interestingly enough, territories in Argentina and surprisingly Uganda were also proposed as alternatives. But at the 6th Zionist Congress, these suggestions were rejected by delegates, and Palestine remained the only potential location for a Jewish state. During World War I, the Central Powers, including Ottoman Empire, were defeated, and Palestine came under British control. King George V approved the Zionist idea of establishing an independent Jewish state in the foreseeable future. In November 1917, the Times magazine published the text of the Balfour Declaration, which would mark the beginning of a protracted conflict between Arabs and Jews. Despite the declaration specifying the protection of the rights of non-Jewish population, many Arabs still view this document as betrayal of their people. In 1920, in Jerusalem, Palestinian Arabs were celebrating holidays. The city's mayor Musa al-Husseini, along with his nephew Amin, addressed the massive crowd with provocative anti-Zionist statements. Supported by the Arab police, people attacked the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, leading to widespread looting and violence. The British army would only quell the riots 4 days later. The city's mayor was removed from the office, and his nephew was arrested. Amin al-Husseini was arrested on bail and managed to escape to Syria before being sentenced to 10 years for inciting disorder. However, a year later, Amin al-Husseini returned to Palestine. Soon, he became the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, ushering in a period of relative peace between Arabs and Jews. As Jewish population continued to grow, Zionists increasingly asserted their claims to sacred sites in Jerusalem. Al-Husseini spread pamphlets among Muslims, alleging Jewish intentions to seize the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the major Islamic shrine. After the Friday sermon on August 23 in 1929, Arab mob armed with knives and sticks emerged from the Shechem gate of the old city, targeting Jewish neighborhoods. The disorder also occurred in the cities of Hebron, Safed, and Gaza. It is crucial to note that not all Arabs supported such actions, and even some provided refuge to Jews in their homes. British authorities sent troops from Egypt to Palestine and forced al-Husseini to call for mercy and tolerance among the people. Following these disturbances, Jews left Ramallah, Nablus, and Gaza. The British Commission investigating the events recommended restricting Jewish immigration. However, within 4 years, Nazis came to power in Germany, and about 250,000 Jews fleeing the Holocaust arrived in Palestine. This time al-Husseini succeeded in sparking the largest uprising during the British Mandate in Palestine. It lasted 3 years and was suppressed by the British and Jewish police only a week before the beginning of the Second World War. Despite suppressing the uprising, the British made concessions to the Arabs. Jewish immigration was limited to 75,000 people over the next 5 years. After that period, the size of immigration would depend solely on the desires of Arabs. Al-Husseini faced arrest attempt in 1937, but managed to escape first to Lebanon and then to Iraq, where he participated in a pro-German military coup. As a result of that, Iraq was drawn into a war with Britain, which it lost in less than a month. After British forces entered Baghdad, Prime Minister al-Gailani organized the Faroud, a massive Jewish massacre that claimed the lives of 200 people at least. In 1941, al-Husseini moved to Germany and met with anti-Jewish ally Adolf Hitler. He sought German government support for bombing Tel Aviv and landing forces in Palestine, but all of Hitler's promises remained unfulfilled. Al-Husseini also played a role in creating the SS Muslim division called Hanzar, mainly consisting of Bosnians. After the war, Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito insisted on his extradition for war crimes. Al-Husseini managed to avoid punishment for all his crimes and lived until 1974. But before his retirement, the former Grand Mufti of Jerusalem made one last attempt to defeat the Zionists. As the British Mandate neared its end in 1947, the newly formed United Nations adopted Resolution 181-2, a plan to split Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. According to this plan, the Jewish state would receive a bit more land and have a regular population. In the meanwhile, the Jerusalem, while being under control of neutral forces, would be entirely surrounded by Arab territory. Zionists favored this plan and even erected a monument as a memorial. But the Arab world was not pleased with this arrangement, and all Middle Eastern countries in the UN at that time did not support the resolution. It is interesting to note how other members voted on this plan. For example, the Soviet Union, which had 3 representatives in the UN, voted in favor, while the US President Harry Truman later complained that Zionists pressured the American delegation, which ultimately also supported the plan. Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru claimed that Zionists attempted to bribe the Indian delegation, and threats were made to his sister if she voted, quote, incorrectly. 2 future NATO members, Greece in its midst of a civil war and Turkey fearing further redistribution of its already multi-ethnic territory, opposed the split. When British Mandate in Palestine finally ended, there were 3 extremely powerful Zionist underground militarized organizations: Irgun, Lehi, and Haganah, along with the 2 Arab organizations, the Holy War Army and the Arab Liberation Army. Immediately after the resolution, these organizations began to engage in actions against the civilians. On May 14 in 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared independence of Israel, recognized by both the United States and the Soviet Union.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
The very next day, Arab League, including Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon, declared war on Israel. The Soviet Union through Czechoslovakia sent Messerschmitt's trophy to assist Israel. Thus, the victory of Israel was forged with Nazi weapons. Later, the merger of Irgun, Lehi, and Haganah into the IDF, the modern Israeli Defense Forces, took place. By 1949, Israel increased its armed forces from 10,000 to 115,000. The lack of unified command in the Arab forces and the support of Israel by two superpowers led to a decisive victory in this war. The outcome of the war came in the form of Israel's occupation of several territories in the Arab Palestine, including West Jerusalem, and the escape of about 600,000 Palestinian Arabs. At the same time, due to escalating massacres and anti-Semitic policies, there was mass escape of Jews from Arabic countries. Joseph Stalin, hoping that the young Jewish state would become a stronghold of the socialist bloc in the Middle East, was greatly disappointed by Israel's friendly relations with the United States. Shortly before his death, Stalin ended all diplomatic relations with Israel. The pretext for this was provocation by the terrorist organization Malchut Israel, during which a bomb exploded in the Soviet embassy. The USSR soon restored diplomatic relations, but the tension between countries remained. At the same time, Arab countries, especially Syria and Egypt, started to offer friendship and anti-imperialist policies to the Soviet Union. Soviet military specialists and a significant amount of military equipment were sent to the Arab republics. By the start of the Suez Crisis, also known as the Second Arab-Israeli War, the Egyptian armed forces were estimated to outnumber those of Israel 4 times. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser decided to nationalize the Suez Canal, provoking the anger of Western powers in Israel.
What do you think of the idea of using force to protect Western projects in the Middle East?
Really no comment on that at this stage.
Developing a clear plan of action, the Israeli army, along with British and French forces, expelled the Egyptian forces from the Gaza Strip and occupied the entire Sinai Peninsula within a few months. However, Israel's triumph would be very short. The USSR issued a demand threatening to use nuclear weapons if necessary, and the United States, unwilling to escalate what already seemed a tense global issue, urged its allies to withdraw troops from Egypt and seek a peaceful outcome. 10 years later, unified Arab forces attempted to take revenge on their previous defeats. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan mobilized and deployed their troops at the borders of Israel. Egypt requested permission from the Soviet government to strike Israel first, but Prime Minister Kosygin refused. Aggression was unacceptable, and this played well with the Israelis. On June 5th in 1967, the Israeli Air Forces launched surprise attacks on the enemy's aviation, completely destroying all military aircraft forces of Jordan, 3/4 of Egypt's air fleet, and half of Syria's air force. 5 days later, Israeli forces occupied the entire territory of Palestine, the Golan Heights of Syria, and the entire Sinai Peninsula. Jerusalem was declared the unified and indivisible capital of Israel. In 1973, the same coalition would attempt to take advantage of the strike which Israelis used to reclaim their lost territories. Once again, luck was on the side of Israel. It was clear that Israel could not be defeated by military force alone, and a new star of the Palestinian world, Yasser Arafat, emerged on political stage.
I was a small, young officer in 1947. Resistance against the Israeli and the British. And during that period, I was participating the whole details of the tragedy of my people.
Born in Cairo, the Palestinian Arab fought alongside volunteers like Salman al-Saud, the future king of Saudi Arabia, against British, French, and Israeli forces in that war. After the Suez Crisis, Arafat moved to Kuwait, where he founded Fatah, Palestine National Liberation Movement. He would also be associated with Palestinian terrorist organization known as Black September, which carried out the attack at the 1972 Munich Summer Olympics, resulting in the death of 11 Israeli athletes. Despite Fatah being considered a terrorist organization in the US and Israel until 1988, Arafat would present himself in the UN General Assembly as a peacemaker and deliver his famous olive branch speech, in which he emphasized that they should not allow the olive branch to fall from his hands.
بغصن الزيتون في يدي وببندقية الثائر في يدي فلا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يديه لا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يديه.
At the same time, fighters from his organization secretly took training in the Soviet Union. Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, would attempt to eliminate Arafat in Beirut during the war with Lebanon, but Arafat managed to escape. In 1987 started Palestinian Arab uprising known as the First Intifada. A few weeks after initiation, Arafat would lead the uprising. At this point, Israel would make a fateful mistake. By applying the divide and conquer principle to Palestine, Israel started sponsoring what appeared to be an opposition movement capable of resisting Fatah and Arafat. This movement, initially established as a charitable organization at the beginning of the Intifada, would be later called Islamic Resistance Movement, or in short, Hamas. According to relatives of one of the founders, Abdullah Azzam, support for Hamas came from Israel and Fatah, which in its turn was backed by the Soviet Union. At that time, USSR was engaged in a protracted war in Afghanistan. Some of those mujahideen would later join Hamas as volunteers. It turns out that both Israel and the Soviet Union were arming those with whom they were later be engaged in conflict. 5 years after the war started, Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin finally shook hands, and the Israeli army would leave Gaza Strip and the west bank of the Jordan River in 1994. Both received the Nobel Prize in the following year, but in 1995, Rabin was assassinated by one of the far-right extremists who disagreed with the establishment of an autonomous and practically independent Palestine. Not everyone in Palestine was happy with the agreement and establishment of peace. Hamas in particular was very much dissatisfied. 5 years later, the conflict resumed, and after suppression by the Israeli army, Hamas won the election in the Palestinian Authority and took control of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Fatah took control of the west bank of the Jordan River. The conflict would also arise, but the West supported the less radical Fatah. From this point on, Israel fully controls the borders of the Gaza Strip by air and land, but not underground. In the 1980s, the construction of a massive network of underground tunnels started, through which they would send medicine, cars, goods, and of course, weapons to Gaza. Before they put up a barrier between Israel and Gaza Strip, tunnels were used for raids into Israel territory, and now those are mainly hiding places for Hamas militants. It is noteworthy of mentioning that traditionally pro-Palestinian Egypt participated in flooding these tunnels. Thus, even in the Arab world, there is no unanimous opinion on this conflict. Hamas will build partnership relations with Muslim states and even with Russia. Hamas leaders met with official representatives of Russia as well as with the president. At the same time, Russia has also maintained friendly relations with Israel. For example, 90 days visa-free regime between the two countries still remains. Well, one way or another, the conflict goes on. And perhaps now the division plan of Arab and Jewish states would have suited Palestine, but currently, Israel is not agreeing to those borders anymore. And even if the United States and Russia acted together in this, only Israel and Palestine can stop this conflict now. That is, of course, if they do want to stop it.
Hamas is ISIS. And just as the forces of civilizations united to defeat ISIS, the forces of civilization must support Israel in defeating Hamas.